The metal chains rattled against the cold floor as she shifted uncomfortably in the dimly lit cargo hold. Her violet skin, marked with bioluminescent patterns, cast an eerie glow in the darkness. The last thing she remembered was her crew's hurried footsteps fading away, leaving her behind on this abandoned space station at the edge of human territory. Humans. She'd always been taught to fear them, to avoid their expanding empire at all costs. Yet here she was, abandoned by her own kind, left to whatever fate awaited her. The irony wasn't lost on her. The steady hum of the station's failing life support system was her only companion now, a constant reminder that time was running out. The sound of boots echoing through the metal corridors made her freeze. Someone was coming. Her heart raced as the footsteps grew closer. The station's emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. She held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible in the corner where they'd left her. The footsteps stopped. Through the cargo hold's viewing window, she caught sight of a figure in an environmental suit. A human. Their helmets' light beam swept across the room, finally settling on her huddled form. She expected aggression, perhaps even violence. Instead, the human's movements were cautious, almost gentle. The airlock cycled and the suited figure stepped inside. "Hey there," a calm voice called out through the suit's external speakers. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." The human's hands were raised, showing they carried no weapons. Still, she couldn't help but tremble as they approached. The human knelt down beside her, carefully examining the chains. "Who did this to you?" they asked, voice tight with barely contained anger. Not anger at her, she realized, but at her situation. When she didn't respond, they nodded understanding. "It's okay. Let's get these off first." As the human worked to free her, she studied them intently. Everything she'd been taught about humans painted them as savage conquerors, yet here was one showing more kindness than her own people had. The chains finally fell away with a clang that echoed through the hold. "The station's systems are failing," the human explained, helping her to her feet. "My ship's docked nearby. You'll be safe there." They paused, watching her reaction. "That is, if you want to come. The choice is yours." She stood there, rubbing her wrists where the chains had been, facing a decision she never thought she'd have to make. Trust a human stranger or face a certain death as the station's systems continued to deteriorate. The human waited patiently, making no move to rush or force her. Through the viewing window, she could see the vast expanse of space, countless stars twinkling against the void. Somewhere out there, her people were continuing their journey without her. They'd abandoned her to die, all because she dared to question their rigid beliefs about humans. Now, ironically, a human was offering her salvation. She took a tentative step forward, then another. The human's shoulders relaxed slightly, and they gestured toward the corridor. "My name's Alex," they said softly. "What's yours?" She opened her mouth to respond, but the sudden screech of tearing metal cut through the air. The station shuddered violently beneath their feet, and warning lights began to flash. Time had just run out. "Run!" Alex grabbed her arm, steadying her as another violent tremor rocked the station. The emergency lights pulsed an angry red, casting strange shadows as they sprinted down the corridor. She stumbled, still weak from days of confinement, but Alex's firm grip kept her upright. The station's ad blared warnings in multiple languages. "Critical structural failure. All personnel evacuate immediately. Time to complete system failure. 10 minutes. The metallic voice echoed off the walls, competing with the groaning of stressed metal and hissing of ruptured airlines. "My ship's just ahead," Alex said, guiding her around a corner. "The docking bay's in." A thunderous crash cut them off as a section of ceiling collapsed behind them, sending debris scattering across the floor. The sudden rush of escaping air tugged at their clothes. Warning klaxons screamed through the station's remaining functional speakers. Her hearts pounded as they raced through the maze-like corridors. Each step sent jolts of pain through her weakened muscles, but the alternative was death. The human's presence beside her was oddly reassuring, despite everything she'd been taught to believe. They reached a sealed airlock, and Alex quickly punched in a code. Come on," they muttered as the mechanism slowly engaged. Through the small window, she could see a sleek ship docked on the other side. Freedom was so close, yet the grinding sounds echoing through the station reminded her that time was running out. The airlock finally cycled open with a hiss. Alex ushered her through, but as they moved to follow, another explosion rocked the station. A support beam crashed down, catching Alexa's leg. She watched in horror as they crumpled to the floor with a cry of pain. Without thinking, she rushed back. Her enhanced alien strength allowed her to lift the beam just enough for Alex to pull free. Thanks, they gasped, trying to stand. A grimace of pain crossed their face as they put weight on the injured leg. She surprised herself by slipping under Alex's arm, supporting them as they limped toward the ship. The roles had reversed. Now she was the rescuer. The irony wasn't lost on her as they made their way across the docking bay while the station continued to break apart around them. The console, by the door, Alex directed through gritted teeth. Green button, then sequence, 2 to 7 4 to 1. Her fingers flew across the controls, and the ship's airlock slid open. They barely made it inside before the station gave another tremendous shudder. Through the view screen, she watched in fascination as pieces of the station began to drift apart. The place that had been her prison was literally falling to pieces. Alex dragged themselves to the pilot's seat, quickly initiating the launch sequence. Strap in, they ordered, flipping switches with practiced ease despite their injury. This is going to be rough. She found a jump seat and secured the harness just as the ship detached from the dying station. DeGrace peined off the hull as Alex skillfully maneuvered them through the chaos. Finally, they reached open space. The station continued its slow-motion destruction behind them. But they were safe. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving her exhausted and shaking. So many questions swirled in her mind. Where would they go? What would happen to her now? And why had this human risked their life to save her? Alex set the autopilot and turned to face her. "I know you have no reason to trust me," they said softly, "but I promise you're safe here. We'll get my leg patched up, and then we can figure out our next move. But first," they paused, studying her with genuine concern. "When was the last time you ate?" The simple question brought tears to her eyes. She couldn't remember. Her former companions had given her just enough water to keep her alive, nothing more. Alex seemed to read the answer in her expression, and immediately began pulling themselves toward the ship's small galley. The familiar hum of the engines filled the comfortable silence as Alex prepared a meal for them both. She watched them work, still trying to reconcile this reality with everything she'd been taught about humans. Her people spoke of them as primitive, violent creatures, yet here was one showing more compassion than her own kind had. A proximity alert suddenly blared through the ship's speakers. Alex quickly checked the readings, their expression growing grim. "We've got company," they announced, and judging by their energy signature, they're not friendly. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the familiar patterns on the scanner. They had found her. Alex's fingers flew across the controls, their injured leg temporarily forgotten as they executed evasive maneuvers. The pursuing ship was larger, faster, and undoubtedly better armed. "They're charging weapons," Alex announced, their voice steady despite the situation. "Hold on tight." The ship lurched as Alex dove beneath a field of space debris, using the scattered remnants of old vessels as cover. Her former companion's ship followed, its superior engines closing the distance with each passing moment. A warning shot streaked past their viewport, brilliant energy illuminating the darkness of space. "Why are they so determined to catch you?" Alex asked, pulling off another desperate maneuver that sent them spinning between two massive hull fragments. Their eyes never left the controls, but she could hear the genuine curiosity in their voice. She swallowed hard, knowing she owed them the truth. "I discovered something," she explained, her voice shaking. "Something they want to keep hidden, about the real reason they avoid human space." Another blast rocked their ship, closer this time. Warning lights flashed across the console. "They've damaged our port engine," Alex reported grimly. "We can't outrun them anymore." They turned to face her, their expression determined. "But I might have an idea. It's risky, and you'll have to trust me completely. Can you do that?" She looked into the human's eyes, remembering how they'd freed her without hesitation, risked their life to save her, and were now fighting to protect her. She nodded. "I trust you." Alex smiled. "Good, because we're going to do something incredibly stupid." They adjusted their course, heading straight for a dense asteroid field. "See that mining facility on the large asteroid? It's abandoned, but the automated defense systems might still be active, if we can get them to lock onto our pursuers." The plan was dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but she understood the logic. Their damaged ship couldn't win a direct fight, but they might be able to turn the environment to their advantage. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a maze of spinning rocks and hidden dangers. "They're launching boarding drones," she warned, watching the scanner. Small, automated pods detached from the pursuing vessel, racing toward their ship like mechanical predators. The sound of impacts against their hull confirmed her worst fears. The drones were attaching themselves, preparing to cut through. Alex cursed under their breath. "We'll never make it to the facility before they break through." They glanced at their injured leg, then back to her. "I need you to go to the weapon locker. Second door on the left. The code is 525923. She raced to follow their instructions, hearing the ominous sound of cutting tools beginning to breach their hull. Inside the locker, she found a small arsenal of human weapons. The sound of metal giving way echoed through the ship, followed by the hiss of atmospheric equalizers engaging. "They're through," she shouted, grabbing what looked like a defensive weapon. The ship shuddered as they entered the asteroid field, massive rocks tumbling past their viewport. Behind her, she heard the first boarding drone's hatch opening. Her hands tightened on the weapon as footsteps approached. This was it, the moment everything would be decided. She was no longer the helpless prisoner they'd abandoned. She looked at Alex, still skillfully piloting despite their injury, and knew she had to protect them as they'd protected her. The first of her former companions stepped through the doorway, weapons raised. The truth she discovered, the reason for all of this, burned in her mind. She knew that what happened in the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of human-alien relations. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her as she raised the weapon, preparing to face those she had once called family. The first shot caught her former companion squarely in the chest, the stun blast sending them sprawling backward. But there was no time for relief. Two more figures were already pushing through the doorway. She ducked behind a storage container as energy bolts sizzled past her head. "Alex!" she shouted over the chaos. The mining facility's defenses. A near miss cut her off, the heat of the blast singing her skin. Through the viewport, she could see the massive asteroid growing larger, its abandoned mining structures a maze of metal and shadow. Then something unexpected happened. The pursuing ship suddenly broke off its attack, pulling away from the asteroid field with surprising urgency. A new alert blared through their ship's speakers. Alex's face went pale as they read the scanner data. "That's why they're running," they breathed. "The asteroid, it's not stable. The whole thing's about to." A blinding flash cut off their words as the massive rock began to break apart, releasing something from deep within its core. Something that had been imprisoned there for a very long time. Ancient structures emerged from the fragmenting asteroid, their surface covered in symbols that made her heart stop. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." She recognized those markings from the classified files she discovered, the very ones that had led to her imprisonment. "What is that?" Alex asked, their voice filled with awe and fear. The pursuing ship was now fleeing at maximum speed, abandoning their boarding drones and their mission to capture her. They knew what was awakening. "The real reason my people fear humans," she replied, watching as more of the massive structure revealed itself. "We weren't the first advanced species to contact humanity, but we were the only ones who knew what happened to the others." The structure was fully exposed now, its ancient systems humming to life after millennia of dormancy. A deep, resonating signal began broadcasting on all frequencies. Alexa's instruments went haywire as the ship's systems struggled to process the alien transmission. But she understood it perfectly, and the message made her blood run cold. "We need to warn Earth," she said urgently, grabbing Alexa's shoulder. What I discovered, it wasn't just about the past. It's about what's coming. Another signal joined the first, then another, as more ancient structures began emerging from nearby asteroids. This hadn't been a mining facility at all. It was a containment system, and now it was failing. Their small ship hung in space between two impossible choices: follow her people and retreat, or head deeper into danger to warn humanity about a threat they'd never even known existed. Alex looked at her, waiting for guidance. After all, she was the only one who knew the full truth. The devastating secret she discovered in those classified files now played out before them in terrifying reality. Her people hadn't been avoiding human space out of fear or prejudice. They'd been containing something, standing guard. And now, because of their pursuit, because of her escape, everything was about to change. The ancient structures were now fully operational, their energy readings off the charts. As she watched them align into a formation she'd seen illustrated in those forbidden files, she knew they had only moments to decide. The next few decisions would determine not just their fate, but potentially the survival of both their species. Alex made their decision, spinning the ship around and accelerating toward Earth. "If we're going to warn them, we need to do it now," they said, pushing the damaged engines to their limit. She quickly transmitted everything she knew to the ship's computer, her fingers flying across the console. The ancient structures were now pulsing with energy, creating a geometric pattern that seemed to bend the very fabric of space. A massive portal was forming, exactly as the classified files had warned, but something was different. The energy signatures didn't match the historical records. "They got it wrong," she gasped, realizing the truth. "My people, they misinterpreted everything. The portal wasn't a gateway for invasion. It was a doorway for escape. The ancient beings hadn't been imprisoned in the asteroids. They'd been protecting themselves, hiding from something far worse." The pursuing ship suddenly reappeared, but this time it transmitted a peaceful signal. "You were right," her former commander's voice crackled through the speakers. "We've been blind, standing guard over a shelter we thought was a prison. But now we need to work together, all of us." Warning signals blared as something massive began emerging from the edges of known space. The real threat, the one that had driven those ancient beings into hiding, had finally found them. Alex looked at her, then at the approaching ship of her people. "Well," they said with a grim smile, "I guess humans aren't the scariest thing out here after all." She made contact with her commander, sharing what she'd learned. The truth had finally united them, humans, her people, and perhaps even the newly awakened ancients, against a common enemy. The classified files hadn't been about containing a threat. They'd been a warning about one coming. As the massive form emerged fully into view, blocking out the stars themselves, Alex reached over and took her hand. "So," they said, their voice steady despite everything, "got any more secrets that might help us survive this?" She squeezed their hand, watching as ships from Earth and her world began appearing on their sensors, drawn by the unprecedented energy readings. "Just one," she replied, understanding at last why she'd been meant to find those files, why she'd ended up on that station, why Alex had found her. "The ancients didn't just leave us warnings. They left us weapons." She pointed to a specific sequence of symbols now glowing on the activated structures. "And I know how to use them." The first shots from the unknown entity lit up space around them, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Sometimes the universe had a strange way of bringing unlikely allies together. As their small ship joined the gathering fleet, she realized that the chains that had once bound her had led to the liberation of them all. The real battle was just beginning, but this time none of them would face it alone. Months passed, and the galaxy had changed forever. The ancient weapons had worked, driving back the cosmic horror that had hunted across the stars for eons. But the true victory wasn't in the technology. It was in the unprecedented alliance that formed in those desperate moments. Standing on the observation deck of Earth's first joint human-alien diplomatic station, she watched ships from a dozen species dock and depart. Alex stood beside her, their leg fully healed, now serving as humanity's chief liaison to the Interstellar Council. Their hands found each other, a gesture that once would have been unthinkable. Your people are requesting you lead the next expedition to restore more of the ancient outposts. Alex said softly. They say no one understands the technology better. She smiled, remembering how her curiosity had once made her an outcast. Now it had made her a pioneer. The classified files that had started everything were now public knowledge, studied in schools across multiple worlds. The ancient beings, still cautious after millennia of hiding, had begun sharing their knowledge. Humanity's adaptability and resourcefulness had impressed them, exactly as she'd argued it would in those reports that had once gotten her chains. We're heading out tomorrow, she said, turning to Alex. Coming with me. Their grin was all the answer she needed. Their small ship, now heavily modified and properly repaired, waited in the docking bay. The same ship that had saved both their lives now carried them between the stars. The universe was still dangerous, still full of mysteries and threats, but no species faced them alone anymore. The chains that had once bound her had become the links that united civilizations. As she and Alex walked toward their ship, greeting crews of humans and aliens working side by side, she reflected on how fear had nearly cost them everything. It was trust, the trust of a single human who chose to free a chained alien, that had saved them all. Their ship lifted off, joining the steady stream of vessels heading out into the endless dark. But the darkness wasn't as frightening anymore. Everywhere, points of light shone, beacons, stations, ships of all kinds carrying beings who had learned to see past their differences and find strength and unity. As they hit the first jump point, Alex looked at her with that same gentle expression she'd seen through their helmet visor so long ago. Ready for another adventure? They asked. She smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that abandoned station. The chains that had bound her were gone, but the bonds they'd forged, of trust, friendship, and something more, would last forever. Always, she replied, as their ship leaped into the unknown. Behind them, the diplomatic station gleamed like a jewel in space, a testament to how much could change when one person chose to see past fear and reach out a helping hand. Ahead lay endless possibilities, and they would face them together.